Hey guys, how's it going? I thought I should wrap up this demo with, kind of a way to show you guys how to take what we had before and to use a Vuex store to make the state management a little bit more clear and maintainable as the application scales. So if you remember what we had last time, let me switch over to it. We had this developer's landing page, and it would list all the developers, and that was data that I parsed from our website. And if you click on a developer, it would give you information about them, um, just also pulled from that website. And you would be able to search. So you can click on me. You can go back. You can sort by last name. I added these Font Awesome icons instead of up and down arrows because I could never really tell if up meant go from A to Z or if down meant go from A to Z. I don't really know, but these are more helpful. So you can tell that title isn't sorting by importance, it's in sorting by the alphabet, which turns out is a lot easier when you don't have any ranking system for title importance. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. That's what we did. We also made sure that if someone types in a query here, search equals Ryan, that would populate here, and that would basically allow you to share that URL for whatever reason. That was a business requirement. So yeah, that's pretty much it. But we had this issue where we made these reusable components. These sort buttons are components, and these tiles are components. And the sort button did something that's pretty standard. When you click sort, it had to affect the way that data was rendered on the page. You see, when I sort by last name, I basically have to affect this list. So since sort, each button was its own component, it would have to go up one level and kind of communicate that change so that this list could change how it was rendered. And so if we look at the code and how it actually did that, it was emitting an event to its parent, and its parent had to listen for that and call its own method. That was okay for one thing, but if you think about how the application is going to scale, where every component is going to have to send a message upstream, and the parent of that's going to have to handle that message, and just imagining what if the parameters for that changed. As you start nesting components, you're going to start running into some weirdness, and it's going to be very difficult to track what happened to your message if it got lost and it went up two streams, and heaven forbid that we decided to put this in its own component. We'd have to speak up to that filter bar component, and the filter bar component would have to come up to this page component, and then propagate its changes down, and that would become a nightmare over time. Just because tracking that change is kind of terrifying, and we don't want to make people lose incentive to put things in components that might be reused across the site. So I don't know how to fix that problem, but someone did, and basically it's this MBU model, and Vue's implementation of that is called Vuex. It's kind of based off the Elm architecture, and basically what it does is it takes a one-way data approach. So we can think of our application in this simple diagram, and they even say extremely simple. But for our purposes, what we've created is basically a view that had its own state, and it handled its own actions as methods. That was all one big blob. But if we pull our components out into their own view, we can pull out the data too into its own place. And the idea is, if we take this data that we saw here, if we take this and kind of put it in its own store, and we just had the view, every time a user clicks something or wants to change the state of that information, they would commit, or they would dispatch an action, essentially. And so when I click the sort button, instead of emitting an event to a parent component, or maybe a parent of a parent, I would basically, when I click this button, I would dispatch an action that would basically update the state of things, this purple circle, and it's pretty simple to track that if you do it that way. And then the components would all be reading from that same store. So this list here would be reading from that store at the very top, and that's kind of the single source of truth, and it would trickle down into all the components in the ways that they'd expect. So that's the idea. You don't have to take everything and throw it into a store, but the more information you have in the store, the easier it's going to be to debug, because you can basically just sit at the front of those actions and jot them all down into a debugging tool and completely rewind every transaction you made with the state of your application, and that's really powerful. But yeah, for this example, all we're going to do is we're going to take that annoying emit logic, and we're going to completely pull it out, and we're going to start talking to our store and dispatching actions to have a clean way of maintaining a relationship with our application state. Anyway, after I said all those big stupid words, let's dive into it. Let's start using Vuex. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go find the CDN for Vuex, so I can just copy that link, and we'll bring it into that component, or that root level file, so that everyone has access to it. All pages have access to that. So here we say source equals, and then we're going to put the Vuex store in there. We're going to import that there. And then with our developer landing page, we're going to go ahead and just create our store. So I'm going to create the store here. I'm going to say new Vuex store. And I'm just going off the documentation here. So this is going to create a new store. And the store it's pretty much going to look like a Vue component, but some of the language is going to change. So instead of saying data, we're going to call our information and our model the state. And so I'm going to take all this data out of here. I'm going to completely strip the Vue component. You can think of this as the app component. I'm going to completely take that data out. We're not going to need it because we're going to read our data from this store, and that's going to determine the state of our application. So here we have our developers that come in from the database, or sorry, the server side renders into that pug data object, and we start our store like that. We've got our sort options initialized here, and then we still got this computed display developers. This can be pulled out into our store, and we could do that later, but for now I think we can just leave it. And what we're going to do is we're basically going to have our computed functions map the data that it's used to having here. So it's really going to be stored in this Vuex store in the state object, but what I want to do is I'm going to want to map a few of the things that my code is expecting, so that we don't run into any issues. So I'm going to associate this store here, so that this Vue application and everything that every component that uses it should have the same store object that it's talking about, and it's going to be this one here. So yeah, so developers is just going to return from the store. So this dot store dot state dot developers. We're gonna come back to this. I don't want to be reading straight from the state. I'd much rather create a layer of read-only, and the store does support that. It's actually called getters, and we can implement some getters later. But let's just let's move the data into the state. Let's kind of restore functionality that we had before, and we were able to actually use this page and have the sort do things. Let's make sure that we have everything working before we do too much work. So yeah, so the Vue thing, we import the store. We're going to get these computed in, all these computed fields in. There's a shortcut. I think it's called map state. I really have no idea what this text editor is doing. It's confusing beyond belief. I just no clue why I would think that I'd wanted to tab that hard, but we're going to be okay. Filter query is going to map from filter query. And I've already annoyed myself enough with all this. I feel like I'm just going to go look into this documentation. It's pretty easy to read. And let's see, I think there's a map state. Yep, there it is, map state. So within my function, I should be able to say vuex.map state and just straight over just map things. I'm not sure how it works with local. Turns an object. All right, well, maybe this is a little bit too complicated for the introductory. We don't need to debug that problem right now. But basically, this guy used to store the information, but now he's going to be looking to the store for the truth of what the sort options are and other things like that. Let's see if it worked. I'm a little nervous because I haven't actually added the store like this before. I was referring to the variable, but I think that's a bad pattern, so I don't want to demonstrate that. And even worse, if it starts working like that, then we're not going to want to change it, and it's going to be gross. So I'm going to refresh and see what yells at me. Vuex must call view.useVuex before creating a store instance. Okay, so we'll do that. So I will say view.useVuex. Okay. Before creating a store instance. Oh, before creating a store instance. So this is not before creating. This would be after creating. This is before creating. Whoa. Oh, thank God. Okay, I was going to say. Okay, so it is pulling the developers in. It is pulling the sort options you can see here. If you look at this, you probably actually get the you're actually getting the real data. So this is coming from the database. This is all talking to our store. It is populating our store correctly. And as you can see, the computed fields are working great. Things that aren't working right now, which makes sense, is this sort button isn't working. When I change my text, it's not updating. And that's because I haven't committed any actions to change the filter query, to change those sort options. We haven't done the update the state part. But this is great. This is what we want to see right now. So I'm going to clear this. You will see this query still happening, and that's because this is based off of changes to the state that are kind of happening. It's not actually changing the state. It's just directly calling an action to change that URL. Okay, cool. So we've got this store. We're actually referencing it off of this view object, which is great. I've got my sort options. I've got my display developers. But now we're going to need to start updating filters in ways that we're not used to doing. So before I had this V model filter query going on. So I'm going to completely just detach that. Filter query is a read-only. It's a computed field, so I can't really write to it. Maybe it would be beneficial to keep that, but I'm going to change this on input to on filter query input. I'm going to grab that name, and I'm going to go down to our view component, our app component, and find that method. Instead of just updating the URL, we're going to create this on filter query input. That's going to be a function. I'm going to take in a value. And here we are going to do that update URL that we were doing before. And maybe we want to move that into the store at some point. But more importantly, we're going to want to commit an action. We're going to want to dispatch an action to our view store. So um, this dot store dot dispatch, and then here I'm going to say the name of the action that I want to dispatch, and it's going to be update filter query, and I'm going to pass in this filter query. I think for readability, I think this is probably a better thing to put in as the parameter argument. So yep, that's it. So we're gonna basically dispatch this action. We haven't defined the action yet, so let's go do that. So let's go back up to our store, and let's make our first action. So here I'm going to define a list of all my actions. Update filter query is going to be a function, and I'm going to need to look at the docs to figure out what these parameters are going to be. I believe it's going to be like state, and then we'll probably get a payload. But I think there's an option. It's actually an object that's like our current context, and we'll have to pull things off. Like state will be context.state, and we'll be able to get the context.payload. Something along this. Basically, this object's going to give us some context as to what's going on, what's the current state of things, and what are the changes that want to happen. So sure enough, yeah, that's what it is. So context looks like it's going to have our state on it. It's going to have our commit function. It's pretty cool. Let's see where this payload comes from. So, okay, cool. So the second parameter is going to be our payload. So it's not actually going to be on our context, but this one is going to be our payload. So we're going to get our commit from here. So commit is how we're going to call mutations. The only thing that can actually modify the state, believe it or not, aren't actions, but synchronous and explicit mutations. And that's going to allow us to easily keep track of what's going on. So a mutation could be like set filter query. And this must be synchronous. And so when I say that, I mean we have to make sure that if I'm gonna run a mutation, it's gonna have to be done with what it's doing at the end of my the function. I can't be calling an API in these things. It has to do something to the state. It has to do it efficiently. So I'm going to hop over to mutations documentation. So it's going to take in the state as its parameter, but it's also going to be able to take in this payload. So I'm just going to call that payload for now. But I think we're eventually going to want to give that a more friendly name. So you're going to kind of just see this action. It's kind of a dud. All it's doing is it's going to map to a mutation. So context.commit is going to take in my new filter query. So I'll take that. I will commit set filter query, which is the name of my mutation, and then I will pass in that new filter query. So this mutation should get executed, and it should say state dot filter query equals this new filter query that's going to come in. That's pretty much it. So it should update the store with our filter query, and then those changes hopefully will propagate down, but we'll see just how much I messed that one up in a little bit. Cool. Update URLs not defined. Great. So as soon as I did that, I forgot to use this to refer to this component. Let's see what else is going to happen. Oh, wow. Okay, it's working. That was weird. Okay, so I guess it's just that easy. All we had to do was we had to dispatch our update query filter action. Then we can hop up here, and this is what we do. We have a context coming in and the payload that we gave it. In this case, the payload was just a string. It was our new filter query. And then we were committing a new mutation called set filter query, and we defined our mutations up here. And then we passed in that same query. the new query. And then within here, we're allowed to modify the state. Actions are not allowed to modify the state. And by doing that, we have a very straightforward way of doing things. And I kind of want to show you guys that model that I'm talking about. As we get more complicated, it's going to start to follow this pattern, but it's going to be pretty nice. So what you see we're doing here is, right now we're not using dev tools or backend API. We could talk about that a little bit later. But all we're doing is we have our view component, and we saw it dispatch an action, and that was down here, right? We do this, this dispatch call. That's the action. The action is going to do the commit, and we saw that up here where we do our commit. We say the name of the mutation we're going to commit, and we give it a payload. The mutation is actually the only thing. You won't see an arrow coming from actions to state. You won't see an arrow anywhere else. It's a single loop, and that mutation is allowed to change the state. It does, and using these computed fields, that change was propagated down in the developer's property, and these display developers updated, and our view updated, because that template is rendering based off of those display developers, which is great. So now the next thing to do is to tackle this sort by. I'm curious to see if this, the use of store here, is going to propagate this .store down, or if I'm going to have to also include it in each component. We're about to find out. But basically, we're going to use the same exact approach with sort by to update the state of the application. So what we can do now is I can get rid of all these listeners here, all these events that used to listen for that sort by event. And what I can also do is I can get rid of these sort options. I don't need to pass them in from the parent anymore, because the sort component is going to have access to them via the store, which is great. So that reduced the amount of code I had to type here. And I had an urge initially to kind of make a for loop to generate these, but now they're pretty maintainable. And to be honest, I don't even need these new lines that much. You can kind of see what's going on very clearly. And so the store actually improved the layout of my template, which is pretty cool, and I do appreciate that. So let's hop over to this component here, and let's add a computed field here to grab those sort options. And I think it would be really beneficial if I knew how to use that map state effectively. But basically, we're going to grab that store object. Oops, we're going to return that store object. We're going to get its state, and we're going to just grab the sort options right off the state. And I hope to move those to getters in the near future, so that we don't have to worry about people accidentally modifying that state object. There would be nice to have some type of abstraction in between. Anyway, so that'll be sort options. So we don't need that as a prop anymore. So that's great. But let's take a look at the logic we've got here. Sort options is going to call from here. It's going to get the value from the state sort options. It's going to compare it to this value. Sort options ascending. This is all great stuff, and we're going to be able to use that. But this sort by function is now going to, instead of do a $emit, it's going to do a store dispatch, and we're going to create another action, which is going to be basically update sort, right? So we're going to update. That'll be the update sort action. And then we're going to pass in our value, which is basically the property that we're going to want to set the sort to. So once again, now that we have this here, we're going to have to go to our store and define that action. I realize now this is just extra nonsense. So here we have our context. We have our new sort value, right? And then we need to say new for everything. But here we're going to say context.commit, and then here we're gonna say set sort options value. And then we're going to pass in that sort value. And that's pretty much going to be it. Our mutation, we're going to declare it up here. Set sort options value is going to be a function that takes in the state of things, and it's going to have that sort value. And we had logic that handled how it should update the state when we were doing it in this component. So this sort by used to get called. So let's take this out of here. Good news is now this component just got simpler, right? We don't need to worry about that. And now let's move it up into this store where we can abstract away that functionality from our component. So there you go. So this .sort options becomes state.sort options. Value becomes sort value. And looking around, that seems to be the only real thing that happens. So this mutation will take the existing state of the sort options. It'll kind of compare it and see what's going on, and hopefully that change will propagate correctly. So what do we do just to make sure before I try to test this that it works? We created this. Oops, sorry, we're back up here. So the sort by function is going to dispatch. It's going to call that action that we created. It's going to pass in this thing's value. That's great. We removed the property and we made it a computed field that pulled down from the store. And then when it came to the template itself, we didn't really have to change anything, right? So it's still going to call sort by. This actually never did pass in its value. And then it's going to just render all the stuff like it normally did. And it won't really know that it's coming from the store because we have those great computed functions. So wow, that was really easy. That's pretty much it. We're not emitting anymore. We're not sending. We're not talking to our parents. So that unlocks the ability to nest this in as many components as we want, and that component will always just talk to the store in the same way. It'll always pull the sort options from that global thing, and we're okay. That's pretty much it. Wow. Okay. Shoot. I thought this was going to take longer, and it didn't, and that is wonderful. There's some improvements, some optimizations we could do to take like this computed field. Instead of pulling developers, maybe we can pull the filtered and sorted developers. Maybe that is the new developers that the store emits. And we could take that logic out of there, and that could be a way we could clean up this component here, so that it's not doing logical work. It's only kind of translating the state of the application. And yeah, that would be one thing to do. But we can add a lot more features now that we don't have to worry about this state having a confusing emitting cycle. I wonder if I can show you guys this Vuex dev tools. So one of the benefits of using the store that we didn't really see is this concept of time travel debugging. So I'm going to add this extension, and this should allow us to play around with it. I've never actually used it before. I saw React do it. I saw this is great, and I've seen Elm do it. But I am really looking forward to watching open Chrome DevTools and look for the view pane. Okay. I'm probably going to need to kill the tab or something. I don't know what it wants. So 3000, it detects it. I'm going to open up the DevTools. View, sweet. Let's take a look at what we get for this. Oh, great. So here we have a view of our components. Let me snap this to the side so we can get a sense of this. It even highlights it for us. We can see the data coming in. Oh, this is awesome. We've got this computed field here. We've got these props that come in. This is great. This sort button. We've got the sort options as computed. Ascending is true, values first name. And you can see how that data is consistent across all of our things. Oh wow, I think this is it. This is going to be the time travel debugging. So let's do some crazy stuff. Let's search by Ryan. You're going to see that these mutations are being called here. I can toggle these. I can go back. I can just play around and let's see what it does. So here I can go back to the base state, and I'm using my arrow keys here to wow, this is interesting. Commit this mutation. Time travel to this state. So I wonder what revert all, stop recording, commit all. So we can kind of hop around and we can see the application change real time. This is really neat. So if anything went wrong, we'd have the mutation that made the change, and we'd also have the state of the object before and after the change happened. So if we weren't expecting sort options to set the wrong value, you can see the type and the payload that come in, and you can see how it's going to affect the state. This is great, and we can't get that in our components. It would be very difficult to keep track of all the interactions we had for every component's internal state and to represent that in one place. It would be very strange and it would be very difficult. So yeah, I'm pretty hyped about this. I don't know about you. I really, I think this is pretty neat. But yeah, that's it. That's all I've got for you guys. A quick review, I guess, of everything we did. We created this Node application from scratch. We were able to use Pug, learn and use Pug. It's that easy. Define our routes here. Even set up a redirect, and just launch it on port 3000. Something I should probably do is make sure I'm listening to that port environment variable in case I want to deploy this to Heroku. So we can demo that. We created this great default layout that allowed me to, in one place, say how I wanted every page to look, and then specify the areas that I wanted it to vary. That's a huge advantage, because when I came around to my view Pug, all I had to do was specify these blocks and then extend off that, which is great. So that would insert it exactly where I wanted, insert my templates exactly where I needed them to be inserted. We created these controllers that really did all the work in getting the data to us. And we were able to do something that I was really curious about, which was view rendering, which is kind of where we put stuff in static content, as well as data rendering, so that our application could make sense of that information and wouldn't have to parse the DOM to figure out, hey, what are the developers and what are the queries I should filter. It made it really, really straightforward and easy to kind of manage that state over time. Using Pug, I was able to make these views to kind of make our components separate. I think if moving forward, I would even move the view logic into here and just kind of import those view components almost as their own file. But I know Vue actually does support .view files, which are pretty much what I just described to you. The Vue component file would basically have a style area, and it would have its it would have its script area, and you could even specify, I want to use Pug, I want to use TypeScript or something, ES6, and whatever this is, stylus I've never seen, looks kind of neat. But no, that's great. So yeah, so we did that. We got our components in here. We had a more simple developer detail view that was all statically rendered. No need to get view involved. And we see in our view that we didn't even need to make that script. So no need to do it if the application doesn't call for it. Don't make it unnecessarily complicated. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And all the content was rendered statically in the server. So right when it spit it out, it was ready for SEO. And just like with the data rendering, we were even able to get the Vue.js stuff ready for SEO as well, even though it was rendered client-side. We could still parse through it and make sense of it. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That was all it took, and combined, it was probably what, 5 or 6 hours, and we really made an application from scratch. I'm seeing this underscore. I've seen this undefined here, and I can fix that. I'm okay. I'm okay at coding. I think I can do this. So developer.name. That's not a property anymore. So there you have it. Yep. First name plus space plus developer dot last name. Great. So if I refresh, there we go, and we're back, dude. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks for checking this out, following along. I hope that this is useful in kind of building applications that when the requirements and the demands scale, we're able to use the same simple, consistent approach and make stuff happen. So I'm going to cut this recording. It's almost midnight. So thanks a lot, guys.